Greetings, dear friends. My name is Vasyl Pekhno. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and I'll be presenting right now the live, fresh, new battle map update on Ukrainian war. Russian invasion to Ukraine. That will be fresh review as of June the 20th, 2025. So please join to watching this video with your likes, shares, subscribing to our channel, and also you can leave your comments below this video. So I'll start with some staff rotations which are being made in Ukrainian armed forces. This is the really important topic to understand, so it will be the issue number one, which I will be reviewing right now during the next 20 minutes. Join us.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
However, I'll start with a personnel issue. On your screens is Brigadier General Hennady Shapovalov. He's now the new commander of the ground forces of the armed forces of Ukraine. Yesterday, he was appointed to this position by a presidential decree. And let me say right away, first of all, I haven't heard anything really bad about this commander. And secondly, to be honest, his appointment actually gives me a certain sense of hope, especially considering the functions of the commander of the ground forces. So let's first take a look at the biography of Hennady Shapovalov. First of all, he graduated from the United States Army War College. There aren't that many officers in our armed forces who have actually had experience with Western training. And it's very good that, as I said, he's now heading the ground forces, because one of the main tasks, essentially, of a commander at this level specifically, the role of the commander of the ground forces is, first and foremost, the training of personnel. Secondly, the mobilization process and the territorial recruitment centers, that is the TRCs, fall under his chain of command. And thirdly, among the specific tasks assigned to the commander of the ground forces is the defense of Kyiv. But right now, this is somewhat irrelevant. It's a slightly different task. So first and foremost, the commander of the ground forces is responsible for personnel training and mobilization. That's why a person with Western educational standards, an understanding of the military and training at the US military college should have a very good grasp of all these standards. He has gone through all the ranks of military service, from commander of a tank platoon to commander of the 59th Separate Motorized Infantry Brigade. In 2024, General Shapovalov was the commander of the Tavria Operational Strategic Grouping of Troops. From 2024 until February 2025, he was the commander of the troops of the Southern Operational Command. Until today, well, that is until his appointment, up until yesterday, in fact, he was serving in Wiesbaden. That's Germany. There is where the NATO command is located. The North Atlantic Alliance is NATO command for providing assistance and training to Ukraine. It's called NSATU. That's the abbreviation, NSATU. This command was created precisely for the purpose of coordinating assistance, support, and the provision of supplies to Ukraine, and B, to coordinate the training of our soldiers on the infrastructure and within the territories of NATO member countries. So that's 2-0 in favor of the organizational skills and experience. Well, administrative, I would say, of Brigadier General Shapovalov. The first point is that he has a Western military education. The second point is that one way or another, he has already interacted with NATO military personnel while working there, specifically when he was in Wiesbaden at the NATO command headquarters for supporting Ukraine. And accordingly, this person now heads the Land Forces Command. That's why I really, truly, and sincerely want to believe that, given the many important responsibilities the commander must fulfill, this will indeed be the right selection and appointment for the position. Because this is not a person who plans operations, not someone who is a strategist for offensives, defenses, or anything like that. This, in fact, is the responsibility of the Joint Forces Command, whose commander at the moment, as a matter of fact, is Lieutenant General Drapati. But as for Shapovalov, he is entrusted with completely different, more administrative and organizational functions. In my opinion, this is a very good appointment. Now, regarding the other appointment, number 2 is Robert Madia Brody, who yesterday reported on his first week as the commander of the unmanned systems forces in Ukraine. What was one of Brody's first decisions? Well, it's clear that I think Sukhorevsky didn't have the political leverage that he could have exercised over previous commander of the unmanned systems forces, Vadim Sukhorevsky. to put it bluntly, he perhaps wasn't allowed to organize the entire plan that Brody can now implement, and he is doing absolutely the right things. Yesterday, Brody reported that a grouping of unmanned systems forces has been established. What is a grouping of forces? It is in fact the merging of two projects, the unmanned systems forces themselves with all the drone regiments under his command, and the 59th Brigade, the only one within the structure of the unmanned systems forces, and 5 units from the drone line project have also been included in this initiative. These are Phoenixes, Achilles, Rarog, as well as Magyar's birds and the 2 drone regiment. So all of them together now form a grouping of unmanned systems forces under the command of Magyar. What does this mean? It means that now a sort of complete structure is being formed. Perhaps this will gradually lead to the integration of the drone line units into the unmanned systems forces. So perhaps this will happen in the future, but as of today, this actually forms a single chain of command for such drone units, which currently provide a rather significant percentage of strikes against enemy targets, their personnel, and so on. Above all, it is a unified doctrine, a single concept set before these military entities, and the implementation of standardized approaches in everything, from reconnaissance and detection to striking targets. And in fact, this is a single chain of command, as I have already mentioned. That is, this is the unification of all processes, so that, for example, experience can be shared, so that what the Magyar birds do can also be done by other drone regiments within the SBS. Or, for example, so that the way Nemesis operates can be studied by Achilles, Phoenix, and the same Magyar birds. That is to develop a truly unified concept for employing these new type of troops, the forces of unmanned systems, and currently such an intermediate link is being created, a grouping of unmanned systems forces. Later on, I think that as part of the restructuring of this branch of the military, 5 units from the drone line will be fully integrated into the unmanned systems forces. That's my prediction. And that's the second personnel update, or rather organizational structural news from the armed forces of Ukraine. It's actually very important to understand that drones now represent not just the main striking force. For example, just yesterday, there was a statistic from our medics showing that it is specifically FPV drones that cause the greatest number of injuries to our soldiers, to Ukrainian fighters. And at the same time, by the way, half of these injuries caused by FPV drones are not due to the drone hitting our infantrymen directly, but because logistics are being targeted. In other words, injuries occur when our soldiers are moving in vehicles, and sometimes this can even happen in the rear. When they are moving toward positions, when they are relocating, when they are doing anything at all near the front line, that's when enemy FPV drone, especially fiber optic ones, for which no effective countermeasures have been found yet strike vehicles on the roads. And this is, in fact, one of the main causes of injuries and tragic deaths of our servicemen. That's why in this particular context, it's actually very important to carefully walk through many different aspects of the war from a drone-centric perspective, I would put it that way. Starting from the creation of such groupings of unmanned systems, as I just described, and continuing with the construction of shelters and engineering fortification structures that take drones into account. Yesterday, in my review of the battle map, I went into great detail about how drones operate and what our objectives are in this process, continuing with the implementation of NATO protocols, which, let's say, delegate initiative. And in the context of drone warfare, it is absolutely the right approach for the transfer of initiative and decision-making to take place at the grassroots level, at the lower ranks. In other words, so that the brigade commander isn't sitting there telling these guys, destroy that enemy over there with a drone, but rather so that the crew commander makes the decision about whom to target and how many drones to use to destroy them. That is, he is, so to speak, assigned a sector where he operates according to the hunter and killer system. Hunter is the one who tracks the target, and killer is the one who eliminates it. So these principles are now supposed to be implemented here under the conditions of the drone-centric nature of the Ukrainian military. At the same time, of course, we should not neglect classical means of destruction because they still remain extremely relevant in the context of modern warfare. But returning to the point that it is precisely with the help of FPV drones that the occupier inflicts the main damage on our Ukrainian armed forces, specifically by targeting our logistics with drones. The issue of covering our logistical routes has become extremely relevant. This includes the timely covering of these routes with nets. That is, nets should be stretched from 3 sides above and on both sides so that enemy drones simply get entangled in them and cannot strike our vehicles, allowing our vehicles to move safely. Yesterday, the Sumy Regional Military Administration, which is currently the subject of some rather scandalous discussions regarding the readiness of engineering fortifications in the Sumy region. So the Sumy Regional Military Administration decided, well, in my opinion, this is somewhat of a PR stunt. They announced that they have started setting up in the Sumy region especially, and this sounds a bit strange on the border. They don't specify exactly which part of the border, but on the border. Why do I say that this is a rather strange piece of news? Because in fact, there is currently an occupation of certain territories and settlements by the enemy along the border. So which border area are they talking about? The places where there are no battles? Okay, maybe, but well, let's just say they're getting involved in these processes a bit late. This should have been done in advance, and it should be done, although in reality, it's never too late. And other regions need to cover everything up like this as well. So yesterday, the Sumy Regional Military Administration reported that they had started stretching nets over the roads. However, this issue raises even more questions. To be honest, this photo raises even more questions because we see the post driven into the ground. But we don't actually see any nets stretched here. Well, the Sumy Regional Military Administration reports that they have started installing anti-drone nets. This is actually a very effective response for protecting logistical routes from the Russians. And we really, really need to protect our logistics. Now I'll move on to the Kostyantynivka direction. And there, the main strike, the operation that the enemy is preparing and carrying out, is precisely related to logistical routes. But a couple of words about the Sumy regionum here, as I actually described the situation in Unakivka a week ago, that's exactly how it still is. As you can see it now on the deep state map, that's how it was about a week ago when the enemy occupied the northern part of Unakivka, and with this kind of 50-50 control in this key settlement in the Sumy region, fighting is currently taking place. What is the main point, so to speak, of Unakivka? It is a fairly large village with quite a few basements in which, in turn, the enemy, if they manage to accumulate enough resource, will be able to take cover from our drone strikes. In other words, it could serve as a staging base, a transit point for the enemy to continue their further offensive in the Sumy region. Accordingly, it is absolutely necessary to do everything possible to prevent the enemy from carrying out this plan, to stop them from realizing it by destroying them. Ideally, it would be best to drive them out of Unakivka, but I fully understand that this is quite a difficult task. However, not allowing them to entrench themselves there and increase their numbers is probably the main objective for our troops right now. Although right now, along the entire Sumy borderline, there are ongoing engagements with the use of our assault regiments. And to be honest, the situation here is gradually starting to look like it is, well, to put it mildly, approaching a certain stabilization, even though this has been talked about for a week already. And indeed, for about a week now, the enemy has not been actively advancing here, but a certain kind of exhaustion on the part of the enemy's forces can be observed. This is noticeable in many directions, although the enemy still remains quite dangerous in several areas. They are also dangerous on the main axis of attack, which is Donetsk region. Today I'll talk about Kostyantynivka and how the enemy is trying to push forward here. So here in Kostyantynivka, there is actually a logistical challenge as well. The Russians, we have repeatedly mentioned that one of the objectives of the summer campaign will be the settlement of Kostyantynivka. The thing is, when it comes to Kostyantynivka, the issue is that there's no real need for the Russians to advance directly at it. To attack Kostya head-on, it makes more sense to bypass it. In particular, we can see that right now the Russians are trying to advance through the settlements of Popiv Yar and Rusin Yar to the southwest of Kostyantynivka. Why? Because the terrain here allows, let's say, for them to move along the ravine towards Drushkivka. And again, there's no need to occupy any of these settlements. It's enough to get close enough for drones to operative fiber optic drones, basically FPV drones or other kamikaze drones seen in order to disrupt logistics. Take out the logistics near Drushkivka, and that's it. Basically, the further you cut off the enemy's ability to resist in places like Kostyantynivka and the Toretsk area, where, by the way, the enemy still hasn't been able to drive us out, the better. This is how the enemy is currently operating. That's why the logistical routes are of paramount importance. Right now, there's this visible movement toward Drushkivka, even on the enemy side. If we talk about the areas of direct combat activity that we are currently observing, we also have this pocket that has formed in the Toretsk area. And this pocket, well, to put it mildly, is not very pleasant. Withdrawing from here is also not really an option on the one hand, because the logistical routes are still maintained. On the other hand, a withdrawal from here would mean the start of direct fighting for Kostyantynivka. And so no one is planning to retreat from here without a fight. But gradually, the defense in this pocket is becoming more and more difficult. Why? because they have to defend, well, literally in a 180-degree arc. At 180 degrees, the enemy is essentially present on three sides in this location. And of course, such conditions, the circumstances of defending at 180 degrees, are unfavorable for any army. They require greater involvement, larger reserves, and more effort to defend such territories. And the enemy actually understands all of this, understands it perfectly well. And that is why, among the most recent developments, the advance toward Alexander Kalinovy, a very important point in the defensive architecture of this Toretsk pocket, the settlement of Alexander Kalinove, and we also have Katerinivka. Why are they important? Because the logistical routes that connect Toretsk with the outside world pass right through them. So the enemy is not advancing toward Alexander Kalinovy and pressing on Katerinivka from the direction of Romanivka for no reason. It's because this will complicate not only the presence, but also the very possibility for our troops to remain both in Toretsk and in the areas of Sherbinivka and Petrivka. Ultimately, this would actually mean an entry into the rear of the grouping in Dilivka and further up in Andriivka in particular. So this refers to the Andriivka-Klishivka area. That's why the configuration of the fighting here is quite complex for now. But yesterday I had the opportunity to talk with soldiers from this direction, specifically with fighters from the 93rd Mechanized Brigade. For now, let's put it this way, no one is planning to retreat from these locations, although of course the situation is, well, difficult. The enemy's numerical advantage in infantry is making itself felt. The presence of the enemy's elite units is also making itself felt, such as the so-called Rubicon and others, which are specifically elite drone operator units. And well, in terms of numbers, a large number of wings have been brought in recently from other directions. What are wings? They are reconnaissance, aerial reconnaissance. The more high-quality aerial reconnaissance there is, the more essentially detected targets, and the greater the potential threat to our soldiers. That's why this drone war in the Kostyantynivka direction is actually developing quite significantly. It needs to be understood. Each of us needs to understand it. And as a sort of cherry on top, I'll finish with a video that was released yesterday by Magyar's Birds, our brigade of unmanned systems. It's actually quite fun. It's quite amusing, but at the same time, once again, historic, because in these video frames, friends, you are witnessing the first case in history of capturing a prisoner with the help of an FPV drone. Nothing was done to the person who surrendered. On the contrary, they were fed, given food, and kept warm, as they say. But this is the first time an FPV drone flew out to destroy an enemy who had come to our land, and instead the occupier surrendered to it. Previously, we had cases of capturing prisoners with a Mavic, but now, for the first time or at least, it seems to me that this is the first recorded case in history an FPV drone escorted a Russian soldier into the hands of our troops, who received him and, well, and they didn't kill him, not like the Russians do. Accordingly, everything here is humane, everything is normal, everything is calm. The person surrendered and will live. And this, essentially, let me repeat, is actually an illustration of what modern warfare looks like with the use of drone technologies. That's how things are today, friends. It turned out to be a brief technological, so to speak, educational segment, but also with the involvement of a battle map. I warned that with each subsequent review, as the gray zone simply expands and advances on the front become fewer, the relevance of reviewing the map itself also becomes somewhat less. That's why other topics which are worth highlighting in projects like mine called Battle Map start to come into play. So we will likewise, in fact, adapt to the current realities. Instead of arrows, circles, and squares on the map, we need to talk about certain educational issues regarding the movement. Where is the war actually heading, and what direction is it taking? Thank you. Like, comment, and subscribe to us. Take care of yourselves. All the best, and see you next time.